Hey folks, good afternoon. This is Brian with Admiral. We're going to probably just wait about 1 minute and then get into the presentation. Today we're going to talk about advanced ad block recovery. And effectively what we're going to do is give you some tips and tricks. And if you're doing anything to try to recover advertising revenue from ad block users today, what would be the logical next step to try to push that a little bit further so you can earn more. And then there's this component of what we're doing today that really is about making the experience better for users on the site. So we'll talk about some tips of, what are types of users that you should potentially avoid? How do you avoid them? Like, what's the strategy to actually get that, up and running? And we'll dive into all the details there. If folks have questions, we have 2 of our team members monitoring the chat, so feel free to ask them. If there's something that's applicable to the entire audience, we'll probably pause and address them. If not, we'll save Q&A for the end. All right, cool. So with that, before we go into talking about, what advanced ad block recovery means, there's 2 concepts that I want to talk about first, which really set the foundation for, how is ad block recovery defined at Admiral? And there's 2 schools of thought in how you would do ad block recovery on a publisher site. So one of those schools of thought is doing something where you're, reinserting ads into the page and, trying to get in front of the ad blockers and just, show ads to users who are using an ad blocker. And that tactic works well for certain publishers, and that's something that we do with publishers, too. But the solution that we've seen just work better for the majority of our folks is an engagement-based solution, which unlocks your full ad stack. So when we talk about unlocking the full stack, on the left-hand side of the screen, we have a website that is an Admiral customer, and this is what their website looks like when someone is using an ad blocker. And then on the right of the screen, we're seeing how that page was designed to look. So you're seeing 2 creatives on the left and the right. We're seeing a 300 by 600 ad, then we're seeing a footer ad at the bottom. So when we get the ad blocker out of the equation entirely, all of that becomes unlocked. So it's not just particular units or placements on your site, like all of the work that your team has done to include the right ad units for your audience, all of that's unlocked here. And the mechanism to do that, to get that unlocked, is by talking to your users. So this is, again, those 2 schools of thought for how we do ad block recovery of, we want to just show ads to ad blocking users, or we want to talk to users and have them intentionally support our site by disabling their ad blocker. And we do that with just a simple message that's shown to the user. It's configurable. We'll talk about things that you should do on the creative side just to get more out of the messaging here. But at a very basic level, we have a message that shows to users at configurable frequencies. And then if a user clicks the CTA, which just asks them to disable their ad blocker, we show them instructions how to do that. I will say the majority of site users using an ad blocker, they know how to disable it. It's very simple to click a button and turn it off. But for the folks who maybe their ad blocker was installed for them by a relative or a friend or a coworker, these instructions we found to be very helpful. Then there's these other benefits from what full stack ad block recovery does in your site that may not be apparent because it's not just about the unlocked advertising revenue. So number 1 is that if someone disables their ad blocker on your site, that is a verified real person. That is not a bot. Bots do not browse with an ad blocker profile. So it's a sign that that is authenticated traffic. So you can use that if you want to target users who have disabled their ad blocker on your site with particular campaigns, give them some sort of different ad experience because that for a long time they had not been seeing ads, but that that's a signal that person's real. It also helps drive awareness to this value exchange. So the value exchange in media is that a lot of media is free because it's supported by ads. And that was the media model for a long time, from magazines to newspapers to television. And then the internet and ad blockers specifically come along, and that kind of disrupted that model. And what we found is that, especially for a user who did not install their own ad blocker, or maybe they're using a browser that's enforcing the ad blocking topic itself, when you put this message in front of a user and just say, hey, this content is free because it's supported by ads, it's a very rational statement to make to your audience. And that's what helps drive these conversion rates, because we're not trying to go around the user, because again, that's what that reinsertion tactic does. And again, on certain sites that will work well, but to unlock your full stack, you really do have to go out of your way and start that conversation, and then users will take that action. Users will notice that you're going out of the way to ask them, And part of why they're disabling is reciprocating that, okay, this publisher is making this value exchange clear. Let's go ahead and support them. Then the last thing is that getting the ad blocker out of the way entirely, it unlocks more than just advertising. So the ad revenue is awesome, but there's likely things on your site that are being broken by ad blockers today that you don't know. Common things that we see are things like ComScore, things like Nielsen, so other analytics tools, login registration functions, sometimes things like checkouts of purchasing products. Not typically too often for that, because the ad blockers want to be careful about not making sure they break things tied to transactions, but it does happen. So when that ad blocker is gone, just know that overall the performance of your site is going to work way better. And the question becomes like, who is using this kind of full stack solution? So this is just a screenshot of a bunch of folks that work with Admiral, and they're using full stack recovery, and we're doing really, really well with all of them. All right, so from there, we kind of set the foundation of what is ad block recovery, or how does Admiral define it. So let's now talk about what basic ad block recovery looks like. And if anyone here is deploying an ad block recovery tactic today, this might sound very similar to what you're doing. So we see a lot of this as when we launch with publishers too, because it's very simple to start with basic, and then over time we optimize with our publishing partners. But the way that it works is a very simple message. The same message is shown to all ad blocking users, regardless of if they're a paid user, if they're coming from an email newsletter. We treat them all the same. And it really doesn't match as much as it could the creative of site. In this case, we just put a Daily Bugle example here to show that we can customize this, but there's a very simple degree of customization that you can do, which is putting a logo on there. But what we want to do is actually match the tone of how you communicate with your users in like an article or other CTAs that you use on the site, the same tone that you use. We want to put that into the message. And we see a lot of folks don't do that. They kind of go with basic out of the box messaging. And then simple frequency. So simple frequency, I believe, gives ad block recovery creates two common misconceptions. So one is that it's annoying. And what we see with that is when someone is using an ad block recovery tool that maybe shows the message every page view, yes, that's going to annoy those users because they're continuing to see the message, and they're either going to bounce from the site or potentially try to do something to get around it. The other is just a much more liberal approach. So maybe we only show the message once per day, or once every hour, something very, very loose. And the problem that both of those create is, one, makes it feel like this tactic is annoying, and the two, because we're not engaging folks frequently enough, it makes it seem like it's a low yield exercise. And that's just not how it works. Now that said, even with basic ad block recovery, you're going to see results. So we see on our network about an average between 10% to 30% recovery rate. That means out of the users who were blocking ads and the page views they consumed, 10% to 30% of those are now being monetized, which is exciting. It's immediate revenue that you see the impact, but it's doing well, but it could be doing a lot better. And we'll kind of show you when we talk about the advanced topics, what does better mean and how do those metrics actually grow when we start doing things that are more than just putting up a simple message asking folks to disable their blocker. Before we move on though to the advanced stuff, I do want to reiterate that basic is not bad. If you're using an ad block tactic like we just talked about today, don't think you're doing things wrong. Just know that that's where a lot of folks start, but there's a lot more that you can do. If you're not using an ad block recovery tactic today, you might want to start with what we just talked about, because on your side, you might have some team members, whether from audience or product or editorial, that would be potentially concerned about the impact that this would have on the site and the user experience. So potentially starting with something like very light touch and very simple would be good to do a proof of concept. And then as you kind of see the results, that's when you want to move on to these advanced topics. And with that, we'll get into advanced ad block recovery. So there's 3 criteria to think about that really takes a ad block recovery tactic from being basic to being advanced. It comes down to targeting, the timing, and then the creative. So the screenshot here on the right, this is a customer of ours who's been using us for a few years for ad block recovery and subscriptions. And you can see that the creative very much fits their site. It matches the branding. We do things like match the colors, match the fonts, take, of course, the logo. And then they did a good job of tailoring the content, so the headline, the body copy they see here, to really speak directly to their audience. Now, this message, there's a few other things that we'll dig into in a few other slides, but we'll touch on it lightly here. So we see that on the left, there's an option for users to not just disable their ad blocker, but purchase a plan to the site. So we can use this message to, if Adblock users don't want to disable their ad blocker for whatever reason, you can exchange an alternative value exchange with them, whether it's get their email, have them register, follow you on social media. And this is a good example of using that real estate to promote their subscription product. So on the targeting side, you want to think about the different tiers of content that you have on your site and how you would categorize them. So you might have content that you would consider to be premium. And for content that is premium, you're likely going to want to treat that content different with your ad block recovery tactic. You can be more aggressive with the frequency. You can be more direct with the messaging because you know that that content is worth someone disabling their ad blocker. The inverse applies as well. So if you have content that gets a lot of new users to your site, you see it's a great lead source for audience development, we don't have to engage folks there. So you can then treat different pages differently, and we can either do that by configuring explicit paths within Admiral. These are just screenshots on the right of our config in the dashboard, or you can pass that data programmatically to us. So if you know that a page is of a certain type, you can pass that data to your ad block recovery tool and say engage on pages of this type, and maybe don't engage on pages of this other type. That same concept applies to your users. So if someone is a logged in user on your site, there's a good chance that they might be using an ad blocker if they fall into a certain demographic. You probably want to treat that user that you have a first party relationship with a little bit differently than an anonymous ad blocking user. So if you know something about a user, you can use that data to then create a better experience for them. It doesn't mean that you wouldn't ask them to disable their ad blocker at all, but instead of engaging someone maybe every 5 page views, if someone is logged in, because you're getting value for them knowing that they're a real user and the first party data that you can collect on them, maybe you only ask them to disable their ad blocker once a week. I wouldn't be that loose on that topic, but if you're getting value from the user elsewhere, we don't really have to press on the ad side. Timing. So when someone comes to the site your first time for their first visit ever, and they're using an ad blocker, you may not want them to see the message at all. You might want that user to build some sort of brand affinity, get to know you, consume a little bit of content before you then ask them to take an action. Because they don't know you and you don't know them in that first visit. So what we can do is we can determine how often someone's coming to the site and then set rules to say, let's let someone get X number of free page views, very much like a metering model for subscriptions, and then engage them with the ad block ask. And then over time, so this first screenshot that we're seeing here with the 5 page views, this is our journey builder in the platform. So very much like you build an email campaign that has different emails that go out at different points in time, we do the same thing for the ad block topic. So instead of having just a single message that shows to a user every X number of page views, we can change the creative. We can have a little bit of fun with the copy, and we can make different variants of that over time. And we can measure which ones work better versus which do not. Now, if you're also a business that has maybe seasonal times that your site has higher traffic than others, you can also use scheduling to have different engagements or have different ad block recovery strategies based on a period of time. So maybe there's an event over the weekend that is going to drive a lot of traffic to your site. Because of that, you're going to have a lot of new users. You might want to engage those users on the ad block topic. We can be a bit more aggressive because you know that that content is valuable. And then you get a long-term impact from those folks who just disable their ad blocker because of that one day, because when they come back, their ad blocker will still be disabled. The last thing here is on the creative side. We talked about when folks launch, they do very simple message, logo, probably some very basic body copy. We encourage publishers to lean into it. Again, make it feel like their site. If there's a specific way that you talk to your customers, your users, we should sound like that in the engagement. So we see over here, this is a customer of ours. They're using us for ad block recovery and email collection. This is also a good way to demonstrate the alternative value exchange that we have. So instead of just having these users disable their ad blocker, we're giving them an option. We're saying, if you're willing to subscribe to our email newsletter, we're going to give you uninterrupted browsing for 7 days. So again, we're giving those users choice. Do they want to disable their ad blocker and just be monetized by ads? Or are they willing to give you their email address in turn to not be engaged for a period of time? So what happens when we go from a basic ad block recovery tactic to something on the advanced side? Well, we see results fairly quickly. So this is a publisher of ours. They do about 15 million page views per month, and they've been using us for ad block recovery. and for GDPR consent as well. And we can see that going into September of last year, we had plateaued with our recovery rate. The green line at the top is our recovery rate, the red line is the Blocke rate. And we see this happen. So when you go live with Adblock recovery, you're going to get some quick wins and it's going to be exciting. But if we don't optimize, the folks who are going to disable their ad blocker with the campaign that you launched with, those folks are probably gone or they've converted. And that's why we want to go back and just tweak the settings. So what we did here is on November 11th, we updated the settings for this publisher from using what we call a soft engagement to using a smart journey. We'll talk a little bit more about what a smart journey means in a moment, but effectively it's an optimization tactic. And we see that we bumped their recovery rate from about 25% where it plateaued for a few months up to over 50% in about a few days' time. That's really, really exciting. And the nice part is that there's not a lot of work on the publisher end to do this outside of really lean into the recommendations and optimizations that our team has found to work over time. At the bottom is just a similar chart, but instead of showing recovery rate, which is kind of a health metric of how many pages have I recovered, we're showing a revenue metric of how their revenue was impacted by those additional recovered users. So pretty cool stuff. All right, so now we're going to go on to the specific tactics that you should consider implementing that would help optimize yield on your Adblock recovered users. So the first thing is smart journeys. So a smart journey is something that we've been working with publishers on for a long time. And the entire idea is that treat users differently based on how they treat the content of the site. So if someone is a new visitor, you might want to have more of a light, welcoming Adblock recovery message. If someone's been in the site a few times, we might want to ask them to give us their email because we know that they have some sort of brand affinity, sign up for our newsletter. A month or so, 2 months in, they've been coming regularly. We might want to ask them to register, all the way down to we could even use the Adblock topic to engage those users to drive things like paid subscriptions or memberships. Now, what's exciting about this is when we talked about general recovery rates for basic, they were good. They were between 10 and 30%. On the smart side, we see a lift fairly quickly when we launch with smart, between about 30 and 50% recovery rate. And then depending how much we can optimize with our publishers, we've got these numbers above 80, 85%, which is really exciting, meaning that 80% of the users and page views that you were losing due to ad blockers, you're now monetizing them. Really cool stuff. All right, surge recovery. So surge recovery means that when you have an article that is getting an increase in traffic, you wrote something that got picked up by some sort of syndicator, it's just very, very valuable premium content. We should leverage that moment where you're getting a high number of traffic and try to convert as many of those users possible to allowed ads users. So what we say here is when that article is getting traction, we can set a rule in the Admiral dashboard that says on this specific article, we're going to run a different kind of engagement. So for a normal article, if you're looking at the screenshot on the left, we might have our basic message, have a continue path, folks can dismiss. Now on those top performing articles, we're going to treat them differently. So we're not going to have a continue path. If a user wants that content that day because of its popularity, they're going to have to disable their ad blocker to get the content. Now you can also leverage surge recovery to drive other initiatives, whether they're marketing initiatives, first-party data initiatives. In this example here, so what Mediaite does is on their premium pages, they don't care if you're using an ad blocker or not. They want you to buy a paid subscription. So they're using that page type as an opportunity to promote their subscription program. If you're not using or doing subscriptions today and you think this does not apply, think about this in the context of registrations or email collection. If you really wanted to bump email newsletter numbers and you have a very popular article, giving Adblock users that option of disable or give us your email, subscribe to the newsletter would be a tactic to think about. So the last thing here is A/B testing. So a lot of what we've talked about, the reason that we can have this kind of presentation is that we've measured the results with our publishers. We want to see what works and what doesn't. And this year we've actually released A/B testing as a feature in our dashboard. So we are going to be offering A/B testing across our journeys, and we'll be able to see things like conversions, exit bounces. So a lot of the stats that both the advertising side and the marketing side care about, we're going to show you how your journeys are performing. This is just a summary of one of the tests that we ran this spring with the publisher. They wanted to do a test of if their default engagement for Adblock users were every 3 days, And the idea was, well, will conversions increase if we, are more frequent with our engagement? And the way that we got to the results here was just targeting certain percentages of site traffic. It's a random roll of a die that folks get, and they get put into a bucket, and then they get served those different engagements. This frequency test was fairly interesting because if we look into columns, the two far columns on the right, we can see that for the everyday conversion, normalized at 100% of traffic, we would be getting more conversions there, which is very exciting. So it proves that higher frequency, better conversion rate. This also applies to things like testing call to actions, creatives. Does a journey with an email offer convert better than in just an ad block only offer? We encourage all this testing. And then in the platform itself, we expose reporting so that you can see what's working, what's not. This is the analytics for the campaign we saw on the previous screen. We can see that we were testing 3 days versus 2 days versus 1. We ended up sunsetting the 2-day campaign towards the end of the test because the performance between the 1 and 2 was fairly negligible. And then we just continue to test with the 3 versus the 1 day. All right, the last thing here as far as tactics, when we're thinking about a lot of what we talked about so far, it's really if you're using a full stack recovery solution, how do we then optimize on that? Our last recommendation here is that if you're using anything that is on, if you're using a reinsertion tool, which is paying the blockers to show ads to, ad blocking users, full stack might be that next step for you for optimization, because we can see that paying the blockers is this, it's part of the overall equation that publishers lean into. Reinsertion, again, it's something that we offer on the Admiral side because it's something that publishers are looking for. However, when you take kind of a step back and you look at the limited amount of your audience that a reinsertion tactic actually applies to, there's a lot of value in just having something that's on top of that reinsertion tactic that actually gets users to get their ad blocker out of the way entirely. The metrics here, so blockers that are not, consented to the acceptable ad standard, ad block users who don't have AA enabled, there's, a number of audience segments that are being missed out just with those reinsertion tools. And then, how does this actually impact performance on a publisher site? So we had a network of sites who was using a reinsertion tool for a while. They wanted to test out Admiral and see how full stack recovery would help bump their revenue numbers. So we started this in September of last year, and we 7x'd their revenue on the ad block topic, which is really exciting. So the overall revenue to the publisher grew by 7 times. And again, we're still getting revenue from those users who are consented to acceptable ads and are getting those reinserted ads. But for the ones who get it out of the way entirely, they're being monetized by your full stack, which is just going to monetize at a higher rate. Then if we look at RPM, so earning per 1,000 page views, we 9x. When you look at the numbers, it makes a lot of sense of why full stack and reinsertion really, they can work together. When you think about adding a new demand partner to your general ad stack, the value of that is you have more folks that are bidding on users that are coming to your site, which increases the total value of the ads that you can serve. This is the same exact thing. So when you combine full stack and reinsertion, and then you do the advanced topics that we talked about, all that you're doing is providing yield optimization for the ad block topic. One more thing to talk about. So we mentioned creatives and how creatives can be helpful as far as getting users to convert more. So we ran a test with the Coalition for Better Ads, and we wanted to see, if we just put a statement on the engagement that tells a user all the work that these publishers went into to make the ad experience good on their site. Because for ad block users, if your ad experience changed overnight, they wouldn't know because they're using an ad blocker. They don't have any idea that you've made things better. So we tested if we put the CBA logo on an engagement with that improved conversions, across the board it did. It was really exciting. We have more metrics and case studying this if anyone's interested in getting more data. But in general, this is something that is a good example of a slight tweak to the creative and just telling your users that you did a little bit more to provide them a better experience. They're going to reciprocate, and we saw that with higher conversion rates. All right, so we finished with about 5 minutes to spare, so we can open for Q&A. We covered a lot. There's a lot of here that a lot that you probably have to think about of how this fits into publication. Maybe you have some detailed questions about, hey, we're using these tools, and how can we do better on the ad block topic? If you do have questions, just shoot me an email. It's brian@getadmiral.com. Ping me on LinkedIn or anything, and we'll get some time in the calendar. Then I will see if we have any questions here. in the chat? Awesome. And we do not. Thank you everyone for jumping on and attending. Again, if you have any follow-up questions or feedback in general, Brian at getadmiral.com. And I hope everyone has an awesome day.